The party for my grandpa's 90th birthday was in full swing, a sea of champagne flutes and polite laughter, when my husband Liam grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't gentle. It was urgent, a five-fingered vice of pure panic. He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear, and his whisper cut through the noise of the string quartet. "We have to go, now. Just walk to the car and act like nothing is wrong." I started to pull away, a protest already forming on my lips. He was being dramatic. Liam was a homebody, an architect who preferred clean lines and quiet evenings to the messy pageantry of my family gatherings. He was probably just tired of the endless small talk and fawning tributes. I thought he was just inventing an excuse to leave. Then I saw his face. His skin was pale, clammy, and his eyes were wide with a terror I had never seen before. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost walk out of a grave and sit down for dinner. My own smile froze. I gave a weak, apologetic wave to my cousin, who was midway through a story. Something primal in his expression silenced my objections. I nodded, my heart starting to thud against my ribs in a nervous, questioning rhythm. 5 minutes later, we were inside his sedan, and the moment the doors were locked, the facade of calm shattered. Liam was breathing heavily, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. This wasn't about him being antisocial. This wasn't about him being tired. Something was very, very wrong. To understand why my blood ran cold in that car, you have to understand my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He wasn't just a man. He was an institution. In our small town, he was a titan, the kind of figure stories are written about. He was the decorated war hero who supposedly returned with nothing but his medals and his grit, and from that, built a manufacturing empire. The name Vance meant something in our town. It meant integrity, power, and old-school success. And he was the sole architect of that legacy. Or so we were told. He had 3 children who lived in his long shadow: my father Thomas, my uncle Robert, and my aunt Carol. My dad and Uncle Robert were dutiful sons. They both worked at the company in senior positions, but it was clear they were just planets orbiting their father's sun. They were good men, but they carried a permanent air of trying and failing to measure up. They were loved, but they were not, it seemed, truly respected by their own father. And then there was Carol. She was different. Her devotion to Grandpa Arthur was on another level entirely. It was intense, almost performative. Where my father and uncle managed departments, Carol managed Arthur. She ran his life, from his social calendar to his household staff. In return, she and her sniveling son, David, were the clear, undisputed favorites. The affection Grandpa showed them was warm and genuine, while his love for the rest of us, myself included, felt formal, distant. It was a subtle thing, an atmospheric pressure I could never quite articulate. It was the way Grandpa would listen to David's boring stories with rapt attention, while my own achievements earned a polite, dismissive nod. It was the way Carol was the only one who could get him to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound reserved only for her. I spent years telling myself I was just being sensitive, that I was imagining the hierarchy. My husband Liam never bought it for a second. "It's like they're all playing roles in a play," he'd say after some tense holiday dinner, as we'd drive home in silence. "Your grandfather is the king, your dad and uncle are the loyal but disappointing princes, and Carol is the trusted advisor who holds the real power. The whole script feels off, Chloe. It's unnatural." I remember one Christmas, a few years ago, I'd spent weeks searching for a rare first edition book about military history that I knew he'd love. When he opened it, he smiled faintly, said, "How thoughtful," and then set it aside. 10 minutes later, Carol presented him with a cashmere scarf, the same brand she bought him every year. He lit up as if she'd handed him the moon. He wrapped it around his neck immediately and called her his dearest girl. He didn't look at my gift again for the rest of the night. I found it later, left behind on a side table, forgotten. I told Liam I was being silly, but he just shook his head. "It's not about the gift, Chloe," he had said. "It's about the message." Her gesture was valued. Yours wasn't. I'd brushed it off, as always. It was just how my family was. It was our normal. The 90th birthday party was Aunt Carol's masterpiece, the culmination of her life's work as her father's keeper. A massive, white tent was erected on the sprawling lawn of his estate, glowing like a palace against the twilight sky. Inside, a string quartet played softly, weaving classical music between the clinking of glasses. Caterers in crisp black and white uniforms moved silently through the crowd with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. It felt less like a birthday party and more like a coronation. This was the canonization of St. Arthur Vance. There were speeches, of course. My father went first, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of his father's strength and guidance, his words laced with a familiar, desperate plea for approval that I knew would go unanswered. Uncle Robert followed, telling a well-worn anecdote about a fishing trip from 30 years ago. It was all a curated history of a perfect patriarch. I watched my grandpa from across the tent. He was seated in a large, throne-like armchair on a slightly raised platform, soaking it all in with a regal, benevolent smile. He looked every bit the King Liam had described. After my father's speech, I saw Grandpa give Carol a quick, subtle wink. Her face flushed with triumph, as if she'd just won an Olympic gold medal. It was a secret, shared moment of victory between them, and like always, the rest of us were on the outside. I felt that familiar, bitter pang of exclusion and took a long sip of champagne, telling myself it was just the alcohol making me cynical. I tried to mingle. I chatted with cousins I saw only at weddings and funerals. I endured a painfully awkward conversation with Carol's son, David, who condescendingly explained his latest stock market win as if I couldn't possibly comprehend it. The whole time, I felt like a fraud, smiling and nodding while a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Liam stepped close, his hand a comforting presence on my lower back, but I could feel his tension too. He was an observer, and he saw the cracks I had spent a lifetime trying to plaster over. A few hours into the meticulously planned event, Liam excused himself. The portable restrooms were for the guests, but he said he wanted to find a proper one inside the main house, away from the noise and the crowd. That was the moment it all started to unravel. That was the last moment of my old life. Liam told me the whole story later that night, his voice still trembling with the aftershock. He had walked into the grand, silent house, the muffled sounds of the party fading behind him. He went upstairs, seeking the guest bathroom. He remembered from previous visits, he said, the house felt different without the family in it. Colder, more imposing. It was a museum to one man's ego. He took a wrong turn down a long, carpeted hallway. He'd never been down before and found himself standing outside our grandfather's study. This was hallowed ground, the one room in the entire estate that was always unequivocally locked. My father used to joke that the Declaration of Independence was probably kept in there, but tonight, the heavy oak door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness in the frame. He knew he shouldn't. Every instinct told him to turn around and walk away, but a force he couldn't explain. Curiosity, or maybe that persistent feeling he had that something was wrong with this family, made him push it open. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and a massive mahogany desk. It was a shrine to Arthur Vance. Medals were framed on the wall, alongside photos of him with governors and local celebrities. Liam was about to back out, feeling like an intruder, when he saw it. A single piece of old, yellowed paper sticking out of a slightly open desk drawer. His first instinct was to just shut it, to leave no trace of his trespass. But he's an architect. He has a compulsive need for things to be neat and orderly. He stepped forward and pulled on the drawer handle, just to fix the crooked paper. As the drawer slid open, a line of elegant, faded handwriting caught his eye. My dearest Helena. That was the first red flag. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. He told me his conscience was screaming at him, a blaring alarm telling him to run. But he couldn't. He pulled the letter out. It was dated nearly 60 years ago. It was from my grandfather, a passionate, dark love letter to this woman, Helena. As he read, his stomach turned to ice. The letter spoke of their secret love, but it also spoke of business. It talked about his partner, a man named Michael. It laid out, in my grandfather's own arrogant script, how he had systematically and ruthlessly cheated Michael, the real inventive genius behind the company, out of everything. He wrote about forged documents, stolen patents, and manipulated ledgers. He had methodically dismantled the man's life and career, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Michael, the letter revealed, was Helena's husband. After the betrayal, Michael had fallen into a deep, hopeless depression and had taken his own life less than a year later. And my grandfather, the celebrated town hero, had not only stolen his business and driven him to his death but had then kept his grieving widow as a secret mistress for years. Liam felt sick. He had to sit down in Grandpa's big leather chair, the very seat of his power. The man everyone was celebrating just 100 feet away, the man whose legacy was built on honor and hard work, was a monster. He was a thief and an adulterer whose success was built on the corpse of his partner. But it got worse. Tucked behind that letter in the drawer was another document, a folded, formal-looking document, a will. Liam recognized the format instantly, but it wasn't the official will we all knew about, the one that had been discussed with the family lawyers. That version divided the Vance fortune and company more or less equally between his 3 children. This one was different. In this version, my father, Thomas, and my uncle, Robert, were essentially disinherited. They were given an almost insulting token amount, a sum so small it was a final, posthumous slap in the face. The entire Vance fortune, the company, the estate, the investments, everything, was going to one person, Aunt Carol. Liam couldn't understand the logic. It made no sense. Why would he do that to his own sons? Then he found a small personal note attached to the will with a paperclip, written in the same familiar, arrogant handwriting. The words on that note made his blood run cold. "Carol is not my flesh and blood," it said. "She is Michael and Helena's daughter. I took her in when Helena could no longer manage after Michael's death, and I raised her as my own. She is the only one worthy of what I have built because it should have been her father's. She is Michael's true heir." Suddenly, decades of strangeness snapped into focus. The weird, unbalanced hierarchy, the constant, blatant favoritism, my father and uncle's perpetual, fruitless quest for approval. It wasn't just a family quirk. It was a 50-year-long deception. Carol wasn't his devoted daughter. She was the orphan child of the man he'd destroyed, and she must have known. Her entire life, her sycophantic performance of loyalty, had been about securing the inheritance she believed was her birthright. Just as Liam was trying to absorb the enormity of this revelation, his head spinning, he heard voices approaching in the hall. Panic seized him. It was Aunt Carol and her son, David. Without thinking, he shoved the letter, the will, and the note into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and ducked behind the massive desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Is the special slice ready?" he heard Carol ask. Her voice was just outside the study door. He could hear the rustle of a caterer's uniform. "Yes, Mrs. Collins," the caterer replied politely. "For Mr. Vance, as you instructed. It's decorated with the marzipan V." "Good," Carol said, and her voice dropped to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Make sure he gets that specific slice. No mix-ups. The one I prepared. It has his special medicine in it. It will help him rest after all this excitement." Liam heard David chuckle. "He'll certainly be resting." "Is it enough?" "More than enough," Carol said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "It will help him be much more agreeable, especially for our little chat later tonight. Special medicine, to help him rest, to make him agreeable." The words were a death knell. This wasn't just about a long con for an inheritance anymore. This was happening right now. Was she trying to kill him? Or just drug him into a stupor so he'd sign something, making her power of attorney absolute before the old will could be contested? He didn't know the specifics. All he knew for certain was that the 90th birthday cake was a weapon. He waited, crouched behind the desk, barely breathing, until he heard their footsteps recede down the hall. He counted to 20, then slowly rose, his legs unsteady. He slipped out of the study, pulled the door almost shut, and ran as quietly as he could to find me. That's when he found me by the edge of the tent. That's when he grabbed my arm as the quartet began a clumsy rendition of Happy Birthday. That's when he told me we had to leave. He didn't tell me in the car. He waited until we were inside our house, the door locked behind us. He pulled me into the living room, his hands shaking as he finally pulled the yellowed letter and the folded documents from his suit pocket. "I found these," he said, his voice hoarse, "in your grandfather's study. You need to read them." He laid them on the coffee table. I picked up the love letter first. "Who is Helena?" I asked, confused. "Read it," he urged. And so I did. I read about the stolen company, the secret affair, the ruin of a man named Michael. My hands started to shake. It sounded like the plot of a lurid soap opera, not the origin story of my family. "This can't be real," I whispered, looking up at him. "Grandpa wouldn't." "He did, Chloe," Liam said softly. "It's all there in his own words." He then pushed the secret will toward me. I read the clauses that disinherited my father and uncle, leaving everything to Carol. It was cruel, clinical. Then I read the final, devastating note. Carol is not my flesh and blood. I dropped the papers as if they were on fire. I stood up and started pacing, my mind refusing to process the information. No. This is some kind of mistake. A draft of something? A joke? But as I spoke the words, all those little moments of feeling like an outsider, all those slights and dismissals from over the years, began to click into place like tumblers in a lock. The Christmas where my thoughtful gift was ignored. The way Grandpa always looked at Carol with an intensity that bordered on guilt. The way my father spent his entire life trying to earn the approval of a man who secretly must have despised him as a placeholder. It wasn't in my head. Liam was right. It was the architecture of a crime, decades in the making. And then Liam delivered the final blow. He told me what he overheard between Carol and David. The cake, Chloe. She's going to drug him. Tonight, she called it his special medicine to help him rest. The singing from the party echoed in my memory. The applause. My grandfather, the great Arthur Vance, was about to blow out 90 candles on his cake, completely unaware that the woman standing proudly beside him, his dearest girl, was about to drug him and finalize the theft of everything from his real sons. We have to go back, Liam said, misreading the look on my face. We'll call the police from the road. Call a lawyer, whatever. But we have to get out of their reach. I stopped pacing. A strange, cold calm washed over me. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as steady as steel. I picked the papers up from the table. I thought of Carol's smug, triumphant smile. I thought of my father's lifetime of quiet desperation. I thought of the lie that had defined all of our lives. They weren't getting away with it for one more minute. This ends, right now. Liam searched my face for a moment, and then he just nodded. He picked up his car keys. He was with me. We drove back to the estate in a tense, determined silence. We didn't have to go in. The party had spilled out onto the lawn, a chaotic scene under the glowing tent. From the driveway, we could see the shouting. It seemed the confrontation had already started, even without us. But it wasn't about the will or the poison. It was about something else. We walked closer, slipping through the clusters of bewildered guests. Inside the tent, my father and Aunt Carol were screaming at each other. My grandfather was slumped in his chair, looking dazed. You've been stealing from the company accounts for years, my father roared, waving a sheaf of papers that a company accountant, a guest at the party, had apparently brought to his attention tonight. It was what I was owed. Carol shrieked back, her face a mask of fury. He promised me. He promised my mother. The confession hung in the air, confusing everyone. Promise my mother? That was my entrance. I walked past the stunned faces of my relatives and straight to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing. I picked up the microphone. The feedback squealed for a second, cutting through the argument. The shouting stopped. The entire party, hundreds of people, turned to look at me. My father gave me a look of pleading desperation, probably expecting me to smooth things over, to deliver another loving, empty tribute. I'd like to say a few words, I began, my voice clear and amplified, ringing through the silent tent. We're here to celebrate a man we thought we knew, a man of honor. I let that phrase hang in the air, heavy with irony. But it turns out, we've only been told the convenient half of the story. My grandfather's head snapped up. His face, already pale, started to turn a blotchy, furious red. Chloe, what in God's name are you doing? My father hissed from the floor, mortified. I held up the yellowed letter. The other half of the story, I said, my eyes locked on my grandfather, involves a stolen business, a ruined partner named Michael, and his wife, a woman named Helena. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Lies, my grandfather roared, struggling to his feet, his body trembling with rage. Slander. Am I lying? I shouted back into the microphone, my voice shaking but strong. I turned my gaze to Carol, whose face had gone chalk white. Or maybe I'm lying about who your real father was, Carol? Was it Arthur Vance? Or was it Michael? A dead, profound silence fell over the party. It was as if a bomb had detonated, sucking all the air out of the tent. My father stared at Carol, his face a canvas of utter disbelief and dawning horror. I let the truth sit there for a moment, letting it poison the air. Then, I delivered the final blow. I pointed to the dessert table, where a single ornate slice of cake sat on a porcelain plate, waiting for the king. "And one last question for my dear aunt," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "What exactly is the special medicine you told the caterer to put in our grandfather's cake tonight?" Every single head in the room swiveled to look at her. Her carefully constructed world, her entire life's work, crumbled to dust in that single, shared moment of accusation. The celebration was over. The war had just begun. The aftermath was an inferno. Carol broke. She started screaming, a raw, unhinged torrent of words. She admitted to all of it, that she was owed everything, that Arthur had promised her mother he would make it right, that she was Michael's heir. She railed against my father and uncle, calling them undeserving usurpers. And yes, she admitted the medicine was a powerful sedative, a cocktail of pills crushed into the frosting, intended to make him docile enough to sign over a new, immediate power of attorney that very night. Cementing her control before this new financial evidence my father had uncovered could be used against her. My father and uncle, still reeling from the revelation of Carol's true parentage, turned on her with a fury I'd never seen. The tent, moments before a symbol of manufactured perfection, devolved into a pit of shouting, accusations, and weeping. In the middle of it all, my grandfather, Arthur Vance, collapsed back into his throne-like chair. He didn't have a heart attack. He didn't faint. He just deflated. The force of his personality, the sheer gravitational pull of his myth, vanished. He looked small, old, and utterly defeated. The lie had been his armor for 60 years, and I had just ripped it away in front of the whole world. Someone, thankfully, had the presence of mind to call the police. My cousin, the one I'd been talking to when Liam first grabbed me, was already on the phone, his face grim. Liam and I didn't stay to watch the rest. We didn't need to. We turned and walked away from the wreckage of our family, slipping out into the cool night air just as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, their sound a mournful confirmation of the ruin we were leaving behind. The drive home was silent, but this time, it wasn't a tense silence. It was the quiet of a storm having finally passed. The next few months were a blur of lawyers, depositions, and injunctions. The secret Will Liam found became Exhibit A in a colossal legal battle. The entire Vance family fortune, the company, the estate was frozen solid. My father and uncle, forced to reevaluate their entire lives, came to the sickening realization that the man they had spent a lifetime revering was a master manipulator who had viewed them with contempt. The family shattered. Uncle Robert refused to speak to my father, blaming him for not seeing Carol's financial deception sooner. My father was a ghost, haunted by a lifetime of chasing the love of a man who was never truly his father in spirit. My grandfather refused to see anyone, sequestering himself in his mansion, a king in a self-imposed exile, his kingdom in ashes. Carol and David were facing criminal charges, their legal fees rapidly consuming whatever money they had. About a month after the party, my dad called me. I expected him to scream at me, to blame me for blowing up his world. I answered, my stomach in knots, but his voice was quiet, broken. "I wanted to hate you, Chloe," he confessed. "God, I really tried, but I can't. You were the only one brave enough to tell the truth." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Thank you. I'm so sorry, Dad," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "Don't be," he said, his voice heavy. "It's a terrible, ugly truth, but at least it's the truth. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground, even if the ground is scorched." Liam and I sold our house and moved 3 states away. We couldn't breathe in that town anymore, couldn't walk down the street without the whispers and stares. We needed a new beginning, a life that was entirely our own, not a satellite to the dying star of Arthur Vance. A year has passed. The legal fight is still a raging tire fire, a mess of countersuits and motions draining the very fortune they were all fighting over. The family I knew is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't feel triumphant or victorious. Mostly, I just feel a quiet, somber peace. We lost a family, but what we have now, Liam and I, and perhaps my father in his own way, is honest. Our foundation is built on trust, not on secrets buried in a locked study. Some people would say I destroyed my family that night, but the truth is, the family was already a ruin, a beautiful facade built on a foundation of lies. All I did was turn on the lights. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder if I went too far, if there was a gentler way to expose the truth. Other times, I wonder if I didn't go far enough. What would you have done? Let me know what you think. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe.